Hello everybody and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope we're doing well, and today we'll be doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw Scream 6. They've made 6 of them, everybody, coming out to $44 million domestically. And once again, our buddy Tony over at Deadline never disappoints and will continue to use franchise opening record. That, of course, is when you just completely ignore the fact that the value of the dollar has changed over time. And if this continues to trigger you, I got news for you. Also, Creed 3 has now gone up to $101 million domestically, but what does this actually look like when in comparison to the first and second Creed films, especially when you take into account the change in ticket sales as well? The film is doing well, and I don't want anyone to ever think that I'm not saying otherwise. I'm saying the film is doing well, but I am trying to point out that the films are not doing nearly as well as they did at one point, because the fact is, and this is something that, again, people don't seem to be able to understand or grasp, many less tickets are being sold today. A lot of people are not going to the movies today as they were once back even just a few years ago. And so that is something that needs to be taken into account, because it does indeed reference the fact that, yes, this might be good today, but what does it mean for the future if overall less people are going not just to the theaters, but also going to support specific franchises, including not only Scream and Creed and Ant-Man, but also future MCU titles and any other film that you might actually be a fan of. But before we get any further, though, into this and doing a full breakdown of especially using Creed as an example, please make sure to smash that like button, not that fire button if you're watching on Odyssey. Smash the rumble button as well. Also, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with the bell notification. That way you never turn a video or live stream goes live on the channel. And also, tonight, everybody, is the 5th annual Wednesday Raven Awards. And so if you want to see what won the best and worst films of 2022, as well as some other fun categories, make sure to check out the show at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. It starts today. Very, very excited for that. And, of course, check out yesterday's live stream if you want to find out more information about that and some of the contests that we have. One of the one contest that I have going on for that, where you could potentially win Blu-rays, 4Ks, Steelbooks, etc. So as we start off with the headline from Deadline, Tony says, hey, Scream 6 screams even louder with 44 million franchise opening record. Yeah. That's unless you can actually compare it in like-for-like dollar amounts, right, using inflation as a proper way of kind of evening it out, and also really as a way of having a fair comparison. It is actually not the biggest opening weekend. That goes to Scream 2 and Scream 3. I believe Scream 2 technically has the highest one. It's like in the $60 million range for its opening weekend. But ultimately, all that really matters is that the film is still doing well enough to where it will definitely make its money back by next weekend. It's lost a huge portion of its audience since the very first one, where, again, it peaked around Scream 2, Scream 3, and then kind of fell off a cliff. And now it's gotten to the point where it's making about the same amount of money every single year. But as ticket prices continue to increase, what that means is that less people are going to see it in the long run. Still good for it for now. This film itself is definitely going to make its money back and make some profit. They've already greenlit Scream 7, so I don't doubt them being able to make 10 of these by the end of it, or even more. The fact still remains, though, that people are just not going to the theater nearly as much as they once did. Creed 3 punching $101 million in its Sunday opening. And again, this will continue to push various things. Of course, this will also bring up, once again, how they will use Rotten Tomatoes and tons of other metrics that really don't mean a whole lot in the long run. The point is, and the thing that really ultimately matters, is not just how much money it's making, but also how many tickets are actually being sold, because that actually indicates the number of people going to actually support a film. Looking at the actual numbers for the weekend itself, Scream 6, again, $44.5 million. There's Creed 3's $27.1 million. That's a 53% hold in the second weekend of its release, so a very strong hold for this movie, which is why this film is doing very well. On paper, this film is set to not only make its money back, to make it also a decent amount of profit. So Lord knows MGM and Amazon must be very happy to hear that bit of news. But the issue that I have with it, of course, comes up when people are trying to make comparisons and are not keeping into account and not taking into account things that should be to get a most accurate count on any film, and also especially a comparison. Comparing a film today's money versus, back in even just 20 years ago, less than 20 years ago, is just not a fair comparison unless you use some kind of metric like inflation, average ticket price, to come up with total ticket sales, or a combination of both, which I like to use because I think that it is the fairest to all involved. Creed 3, though, still doing very well. The new movie 65 also did much better than what was projected. This film was expected to make only single digits. It made $12.3 million domestically. However, because this film cost a little over $50 million, the break-even point for the movie is definitely high enough to where it is still in a lot of trouble, probably won't make its money back. But I know that there are people that like this film. I found it to be a giant bore, just like with Creed 3. But hey, people are going to see this film, and more people are going to see this film than had been projected originally. So who knows where this could be. Stranger things, of course, have happened. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania continues to lose money every single day. Just continues just to drop off every single day. 45% drop in its fourth week of release. This film has already gotten a jump start on losing to the previous Ant-Man films, especially when you adjust those numbers properly. You start to recognize that this film's, basically edge that it got because it was a franchise opening record is very quickly diminishing. And the fact is, this film most likely won't even break $500 million. And if it does, it will barely, which means this film is looking to be pretty much a guaranteed flop at this point in time, whether using the $500 million mark as a metric for its break even or a $600 million mark for its break even. Again, whatever metric it is that you're using, I think no matter where you are on that, you will agree, not looking good for Ant-Man. This film is looking to flop. And when you're spending an extra $70 million on a film and all that you're getting out of it is losing money and you're making the least amount in the entire franchise, yeah, does not bode well, not just for Ant-Man, but also for the future of the MCU as well. Cocaine Bear came in the top 5, $6.2 million on the 44% drop. This film has not broken even yet, but is well on its way to doing so with drops like this, and also with still getting some people going out to see it. It's pretty much going to, finish making the vast bulk of its money at this point. I think most people were interested in it in its first weekend, second weekend. Now it's starting to kind of wane off a little bit. I've heard some people say good things. A lot of people say bad things about it, so very mixed reaction here, and it seems to be getting very mixed box office. But because the movie didn't cost as much, that means that the film, and also had a very good opening, it means that the film ultimately will be able to make its money back when all is said and done. Jesus Revolution has made its money back, so kudos to Lionsgate for being able to pull that off, a 39% drop in its third week of release. The new film Champions did not even get to the top 5, coming out at over 3,000 screens, so a wide release there, only making $5.1 million in its opening weekend. We don't have a budget yet on this movie, so I cannot make any projections on it, but let's just say $5 million is not the best way to start unless you are a micro-budget film, and a film starring Woody Harrelson. Again, even if it's $20 to $30 million of a budget, $5.1 million is not a good place to start with that. Avatar continues to be in the top 10, making another $2.7 million, though, as I mentioned last week, I am officially calling this film's domestic chances of overtaking that of Top Gun Maverick's domestic to be done. As you can see, it's starting to drop out of the remaining theaters that it has left. Still making some money, though, and obviously this film was definitely a big success. But when you compare this film to the previous film and you adjust for inflation, etc., it's not nearly as much of a success. Basically, meaning a lot of people who went to go see Avatar 1 did not go see Avatar 2. And that's a big problem in the long run, right? If you're seeing massive drop-offs of audience totals between your movies, even if your numbers look better because your average ticket price is higher, for instance, or you're in more premium format screens, that is just very, that's just a very short-term solution or very short-term hiding of a reality that will eventually bode itself out and will eventually lead to it. So again, though this looks good, and I know that there's a lot of Avatar fans out there, I will say, don't have the biggest confidence in this franchise going all the way to Avatar 5 being this big of a success, especially if the budgets continue to balloon like it did for this one. This movie got quite lucky in a lot of ways, especially because of the premium format screens, and of course James Cameron doing a very good job and always doing a very good job of being able to drive people to go see his movies. But I do think that ultimately, if you don't start to see these films actually have good stories in them, then ultimately you're just going to continue to see the drop-offs that you've seen from the first film to this film, and also in many other franchises to boot as well. Puss in Boots coming in at number 9, $1.6 million. This film, again, doing much better than had been originally anticipated, and continuing to make and add it to its profit, well over $100 million in profit. Though, of course, when it comes to anything coming out from Disney, the vast majority of things coming out from Disney, including Avatar, also from Universal, Puss in Boots, and a lot of the other films that they've done, they did get China releases, which means that they gave millions upon millions of dollars to the communists in China, the Communist Party in China, and so I will, of course, call them out and say, screw you. Operation Fortune dropped 59%. Very, very big drop off for a film that I actually still want to go see. Not looking good for it, though. It did get an early release internationally. It's not doing much of anything domestically, though, only making so far $5.5 million. So let's just say this film's chances of breaking even, not likely. I can't really make any projections on it because of us not being able to, track this film from the very beginning, but it's just not looking good for it when we look at the numbers themselves. And of course, we have some other films mentioned here, 80 for Brady, which is still somehow hanging around. You also have films like Knock at the Cabin, still barely hanging around. And you also have Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, by the way, has not added much of anything at all. So again, for those that were hanging on to the hope of, hey, this film's getting released in certain countries after the fact, those countries did not produce anything for this movie. Again, was still able to make its money back based off the metrics I have, but still definitely a far cry from the original film, which, broke $1 billion. Going to the digital films, Scream 6 is at $67.1 million, so a very strong start. Film only needs to make about $80 to $90 million to break even, so it will definitely get to that by next weekend, so very strong start here. But I do want to have people keep in mind that when you compare this film to the other Scream films and adjust for inflation, the numbers aren't as impressive as one might think. And the one film I'm going to use as a comparison is Creed 3. So Creed 3 is at $179.3 million. And so again, on paper, that is a very strong number. This film is getting very close to its break-even point, and it will break even, and it will make profit. The thing that I want to point out, though, is the comparison between the other three movies. Now, when you look at the numbers.com, right, this is the unadjusted numbers. When you compare exactly the opening weekends, right, 58.3 versus 35 versus 29, you look at the current box office numbers, or at least as of what it would be today, $101 million is where Creed 3 is. At the same point in release, the second Creed film was at 80.9, and then the first Creed film was at 64.5. Now, if you just look at those numbers, you say, okay, I'm seeing increases of around $20 million every single film. Okay, well, when you adjust for inflation, that definitely changes a little bit at the very least, right? You go to $70 million, $81 million, to $101 million. Okay, that seems to be staying a very similar story. The problem, of course, with the numbers is that their metrics do not actually use the current rate of inflation. So as you all know, I have been using the official BLS, that's the Bureau of Labor Statistics website, comparing what these films did to what the dollar is in 2023. January 2023, what would that value be back in 2015, back in 2018? And these are the numbers that I got for Creed specifically. So looking at the total box office numbers here, okay, if you actually look at it, right, it was about $1.28. A dollar today was worth $1.28 back in 2015. That means that the film, as of today, would have been $82.6 million. You look at Creed 2's numbers, and that was about 1.21, right? $1 is worth $1.21, 97.9. So notice the difference between Creed 2 and Creed 3 are really not all that drastic. So yes, Creed 3 is still pacing ahead of both the original Creed and the second Creed film. What becomes interesting, though, is when you actually look at the overall ticket sales. So I have, of course, put in the average ticket price for 2015, 2018, and adjusted those numbers for inflation to make it fair. But what's interesting about these numbers, though, is that if you look at what the average ticket price is for 2023, right now they're saying it's $9.17. Now, the problem with that is that that's not really what the average ticket price is for what the Creed 3 film has done so far, because ultimately, a lot of the tickets, I would say a huge portion of the tickets for Creed 3 have come from premium format screens. People want to go see this film in IMAX. People want to go see this film on the biggest screen possible. And so therefore, the average ticket price is going to be a lot higher. In fact, there are articles out there saying, why is no one talking about how the average ticket price is actually $11? So even being a little bit more fair, right? Not going outright to say $11, even if you change this to $10 as an average ticket price for this film, at least at the same point of its release, you start to realize, okay, that then makes the difference between these two films not a whole lot. You then take this film and say, okay, what if it actually is that $11, especially taking into account the premium format screens that a lot of people are seeing this film in, and then it doesn't take that much more then to bring this film to be underneath the number of ticket sales sold by Creed 2 by the same point in its release. So I bring these things up because this does absolutely matter. This is why adjustment for inflation absolutely matters, and why average ticket price also matters too in comparing these films, because it gives you a better metric of where these films actually are. And what we're seeing is we are seeing a decrease in overall ticket sales, but an increase in average ticket prices, an increase in people going to see films up front, but then not going to see it down the line, which just means that we're seeing in comparison, and obviously I'll do a final breakdown of this, and I'll of course also do breakdowns of the other films I've mentioned, whether it be the Scream franchise or it be the Ant-Man franchise, because you're going to see very similar stories. The fact is that less people are still seeing Creed 3 versus Creed 2 versus the first Creed film. Again, based on the numbers that we are seeing, or at least based on the tracking of them. So even though I think Creed 3's on paper will have the highest box office of all of them, because again, when you compare these films, the first Creed film made 188 versus Creed 2's 214. And again, that is using the adjusted for inflation numbers from numbers.com. Again, not the perfect number of inflation because it's not using the current metrics, but still this film is likely going to be able to not only pass up where it is right now, but even possibly even to pass up what the numbers would actually be when you do a proper adjustment for inflation. But because the average ticket price is going to be a lot higher for a Creed 3 versus a Creed 2 versus a Creed 1, that is where we ultimately have to look at these things. And again, this goes for any film. Now, some people say, you've never talked about this before. Well, I talked about inflation forever. If you are saying that I've never talked about inflation before, you clearly don't watch my channel. If you're talking about ticket sales, yeah, that is something relatively new that I've started to dive into because people have been bringing that up, saying, well, I don't think inflation's the fairest thing. I think ticket sales are. The problem is that there is not a centralized database of information on ticket sales. All it is people saying, hey, here was what the average ticket price was for the year. Here's the total amount it made domestically. And so therefore we can try to, engineer a likely overall ticket sale number. But the problem, again, as I've mentioned previously with those numbers, is that especially in the more modern day world where you have a lot more premium format screens, and so therefore a lot of these films end up having a higher average ticket price, especially for a film like Avatar, where the vast majority of its showings were indeed from premium format screens. Again, from the very beginning, it was like 64% of people who were going to see those films were seeing it in IMAX. We're seeing it in IMAX 3D. We're going to see it in Dolby Vision 3D. And that's not even counting just the regular 3D showings. And so that has to be taken into account because it, of course, raises the average ticket price, which means the total number of people going to see it is actually lower than what is being indicated. So I know that was a bit wonky there, but if you enjoy box office numbers and box office breakdowns, I hope that hopefully makes a little bit more sense as to why I spent a lot of time on these films especially. And again, it's not because I hate the films that I'm going to want to try to tear them down. It's because the box office media is ultimately, I think, doing a lot of people a disservice by not giving actual factual information and not putting things into historical context. All right, moving on from that, let's go ahead and dive into the film 65. $20.8 million. So again, much stronger than what was expected, but the film needs to make quite a bit more if it hopes to break even. Right now, this is saying that the production budget was around $91 million, meaning it's made 0.2 times its budget. We'll go ahead and look at the charting based off of the budget that I've seen. So again, sometimes the numbers will get the budget right. Sometimes it will have its own reporting on it. And so we'll compare that. But either way, the film is going to struggle to break even regardless of what its budget is because it costs more than enough for this to, again, be a very, better than expected, but still a rough start for a film of its magnitude. Speaking of rough starts and just rough runs in general, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, after about 4 weeks, is only at $447 million. So yeah, this film is already at the point where it's starting to talk about, okay, just how much more money can it actually make? That's the point we're at, right? Where again, $500 million seems to be a ceiling for this movie. So is it going to be able to break that ceiling? Maybe. Again, my charting has this film making a minimum of $518 million. So that means that this film will be a chart breaker in the negative. Whereas Avatar: Way of Water and other films like it, right, were chart breakers, Puss in Boots as well, were chart breakers in the positive direction, doing better than projected, doing better than historical standards. This film is set to do worse. And the fact that it's an MCU film, trying to set up the next major villain in the MCU franchise, the fact that also in response to the opening of this film, they've decided to push back the Marvels. There are a lot of things going on right now that indicate this film being a massive disappointment and, of course, being a financial flop as well. Just doing a very brief analysis of this. So again, I'll do a fuller, similar to what I did for Creed, for films like this too. When you compare these films, so again, these are the numbers adjusted for inflation, you see that Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania is at $447. Ant-Man and the Wasp, the second film in the franchise, made $627 million. So it's actually higher than that because remember, these numbers are not accurate to the rate of inflation, so it's actually higher than what it would be. $564 million with the first Ant-Man. So this right now is likely, and I will say I would bet money on it that this film will be the lowest grossing Ant-Man film of the entire Ant-Man franchise. So yeah, you can always say a lot of things about the biggest opening domestic ever, the best opening ever for a franchise, but that does not actually mean anything in the long run because of these various factors that I've been trying to be consistent about, but for some reason people continue to just want me to not talk about it. And again, if you don't like it, I got news for you. When you compare where it was at the same point in its release, 197.9 is where the current Ant-Man film is. At the same point, Ant-Man and the Wasp was at 184. Again, probably a lot closer to this number, though, when you use the actual rate of inflation of $1.28. And then the same thing can also be said for $1.21. Sorry, $1.21 for this film, $1.28 for the film back in 2015. And so we're seeing, again, you see these numbers right here. In the third week of its release, it had less than $1 million on a Monday. Tuesday is Discount Tuesday, so that makes sense as to why it made over $1 million. But every other day, 870,000, 700,000. Friday, creep back up to $1 million. But this film is just, again, starting to fall far behind the pace of these other two films. And again, both of these films did not see below $1 million numbers until their fifth Mondays. The fact that this film actually dropped below $1 million for the first time within its second week of release, I believe. Let me go ahead and double check that again. So actually, no, the third week. Still, 2 weeks. It's 2 weeks behind where the other films were. That's the reason why I'm thinking $500 million is not likely going to happen for this film. Cocaine Bear is at $65.6 million. A lot of people have been talking about this. People either love it or hate it. Jesus Revolution, some people have really enjoyed this film. I just don't have a genuine interest in it personally. It's just not my kind of movie. $39.4 million for this movie, so this film has actually made its money back. Champions at $5.9 million. Who knows whether the film is going to make its money back? It looks like a heartwarming story. It looks like a heartwarming, compelling story, but not doing much as far as the money is concerned. Avatar: Way of Water, $2.29 million, so could end up at $2.3 billion when all is said and done, but again, y'all know my thoughts on that. Puss in Boots, $461.5 million, and then Operation Fortune at $26 million. So let's go ahead then and dive into, and again, by the way, for those wondering where I got the average ticket price earlier, so again, if you take this number right here, right, this says it's at $9.57. So again, there are different metrics that say for some reason $9.17 is the average, but the last time this updated for 2021 was at $9.57. But there are articles that exist from IndieWire, for instance, from October of last year. The average movie ticket price is now $11. Why is that a secret? The National Association of Theater Owners has its reasons, but it hasn't updated the average ticket price since 2019. So that's the reason why a lot of people are having to come up with their own metrics and why you're seeing different reports on that. So the fact that this is being reported as being the likely average ticket price is also not necessarily going to be universal because not every film gets released in the big format screens. All right, going ahead and looking at the actual numbers themselves for the films we've been talking about. Scream, because it costs so little money, even though it's lost a lot of its audience since the very beginnings of the franchise, it still is able to make its money back because it spends very little on it and it has a hardcore fan base that shows up for them. Film's already at negative $12 million after just 1 week, so this film will make its money back by next weekend. Again, 87.5 is its break-even point, and that will easily happen by the end of next week. Now, according to the budget that I saw, and again, the budget that I saw was being reported by Wikipedia, which has as its own source and its own foundation, right, various articles that have it, and so again I've checked those. So that means that we're looking at, if you're taking the number, it would be even worse. But even at 45, right, let's say $45 million is the budget, its break even is still 112.5. A start of 20.8 in your first week, though it's better and higher than what people expected, it's still not good enough to be able to think that this film is going to make its money back. $55 million in the red, probably will end up being in the red by the end of its run. But man, oh man, if it cost the $91 million that was being reported by the numbers, that could be very, very bad for that studio. Champions, as I've mentioned, does not have a budget being reported yet, so who knows where that film stands. Operation Fortune, we can talk about this film only insofar as the film is still $59 million in the red, because we can't track this film from the beginning because it had an early international release. I cannot make many projections on that. I can make projections, though, on Creed 3. So again, the people saying, you're just hating on it. Hey, I'm also just reporting the numbers. Right now, if indeed it continues on the track that it is, if it follows other historical standards, the film will make somewhere between $256 million and $358 million when all is said and done, with an average of $307. Because of its budget of $75 million, it means it's going to make somewhere between $41 and $102 million in net gain profit. So this film will be broken even by the end of next weekend based on the numbers that I have. But again, even though it's going to be breaking even, it's going to be making them profit, the fact still remains is that they still are losing audiences, and this is just across the board. That's not just for Creed or for Scream or for Ant-Man or for Avatar. It's across the board that audiences are going down, right? The same is also true of films like Top Gun Maverick. The same is still true of films that I also enjoyed going to see, right? It doesn't change for those movies. It's just that the media specifically goes out of their way to talk about records, etc., to run with headlines versus actually trying to give full context information. Going to the other films, Cocaine Bear is at -8, but that will probably change by the end of next weekend, or at the very least from 2 weeks from now. Jesus Revolution has made its money back with a little bit of profit. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania is still $31 million in the red, and likely will be a negative chart breaker, which is never a good sign. And as far as other films are concerned, really not a lot of updates to any of the numbers past those films. Obviously, Avatar: Way of Water is at almost $2.3 billion. Puss in Boots, $150 million or so in net gain profits. So very impressive numbers there. And then $858 million is where Black Panther: Wakanda Forever currently stands. And so, again, made its money back, but a far cry from the original box office. And that's not just in overall numbers and overall gains and overall box office reporting, but also when you, again, use that same comparison that I used for Creed for a film like Black Panther, the difference in ticket sales is going to be, again, abysmal. And the MCU can really say that about a lot of their movies, and it's just not looking good for them going forward. But what are y'all's thoughts about this? Have you seen Scream 6, 65, Champions, any of those films? What are y'all's thoughts about them? Let me know in the comment section down below. And also, please make sure you check out tonight's live stream. I'll create the event right after I get this video done for the 5th Annual Wednesday Raven Awards. Again, it's to be a lot of fun. And check out yesterday's live stream if you want to find out more information about entering in for a potential giveaway. I also posted it on my social media links as well. And check that out because that will be ending within a few hours, the giveaway opportunity. Anyway, you guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, a blessed third Sunday of Lent. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge shout out to all of my March Patreon, Subscribe Star, and local members at the Keeper of the Bifrost level and above. Starting off with Father Luca Illich, Garrett Searles, Chris from the 80s, who you can check out over his YouTube channel by the same name, Jaimir Irie Hymason, Joe Horn, Jonathan Carney, Orange at Reviews, you can check out over at his YouTube channel, Laura, the Modern Major General Story, Rosetta Allen, who you can check out at her YouTube channel, Eagle Writer, Miss Martin Muses, and you can check her out at her YouTube channel by the same name also. To my Subscribe Star members, Matt317, you can check out over at his Twitch channel, Matt317, Fast Reaction, The R, Mr. Roy, J-Rod, the Beer Guru, and ZK Man, who you can find out over at xtheboundaries.co. And lastly, to my locals members, Miss Minnesota Hockey Fan, How About a Hockey Player, J.H. Schwalbach, Brett D90, and the amazing lawyer, Robert Barnes. Thank you all very much for supporting me at the Patreon level, Subscribe Star level, and locals level of Keeper the Bifrost and above. If you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and every video, make sure to check out the top link in the video description to find out more ways that you can support the channel, including ways to get access to a podcast and also ways to get access to giveaways that I do on the channel, and also, of course, to my coveted Chosen of Valhalla level as well. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and as always, God bless.